In the mid-19th century, the internal order of the United States was a mechanical paradox of rapid industrial growth fueled by the biological machine of human slavery, and it took a frontier savant named Abraham Lincoln to recognize that the systemic friction was leading to a total structural collapse. Lincoln applied a 5-step process to the American story. His goal was the preservation of a unified continental empire. His problem was a house divided by two incompatible economic engines. His diagnosis was that the logic of liberty was the only sustainable moral anchor for a modern nation. His design was the mobilization of the North's industrial alpha, and his execution was a display of aggressive persistence that turned the abyss of the Civil War into the foundry of a global superpower. Lincoln realized that the big cycle of history was shifting, and he utilized the strategic alpha of the new mechanical age to win the conflict, specifically the telegraphic machine and the transcontinental railroad. He was the first high-tech president, using the data flow of the telegraph to bypass slow-moving generals and command the human machine of the Union Army in real time from a small office in the War Department. This total concentration of force allowed him to maintain interior lines and react to Confederate momentum with mechanical precision. Lincoln also recognized that the external order of the world was watching, so he used the Emancipation Proclamation as a moral reset to ensure that the American brand remained synonymous with evolutionary progress, effectively blocking European empires from intervening. As the war grinded through the abyss of 1864, Lincoln's grit became the national engine, pushing the 13th Amendment through a fractured Congress to hard-code radical truth into the Constitution. He understood that the mechanical reality of the North, its factories, its mass-produced rifles, and its thousands of miles of steel track would eventually overwhelm the agrarian disorder of the South if the Union's internal order could hold firm. The ultimate synthesis of Lincoln's journey was the transformation of a collection of individual states into a single, industrialized nation-state, bound by a new birth of freedom. He moved the United States from a loose confederation to a global shaper, proving that a leader who masters both radical open-mindedness and calculated power can save a civilization from itself. Even as the biological machine of Lincoln was stopped by an assassin's bullet, his design and plan for a modern America was already irreversible. Focus on the intersection of steel and soul, embrace the high-tech logic of his leadership, and remember that the story of us is the story of a machine that was redesigned in the fire of crisis to become the engine of the world. This was the secret of the Lincoln era, and the reason the American system survived its greatest structural failure. While the biological machine of the Union Army struggled on the battlefields of 1862, Abraham Lincoln was busy pioneering a new systemic logic for modern warfare by turning the White House into a command and control center powered by the telegraphic engine. Lincoln realized that the 5-step process for winning a continental war required a total data flow that bypassed the mechanical friction of slow-moving generals, so he spent more time in the War Department's telegraph office than almost anywhere else. His goal was the total concentration of force at the strategic alpha points of the rebellion. His problem was that his commanders often suffered from psychological paralysis and failed to move with momentum. His diagnosis was that the ship of state needed a real-time driver. His design was a networked presidency, where he could send direct binary orders to the front lines, and his execution was a display of aggressive persistence that saw him firing off over 1,000 telegrams to micromanage the internal order of the war. This was the turning point where the American machine moved from the age of horseback to the age of electricity. Lincoln also utilized the mechanical advantage of the Transcontinental Railroad Act of 1862, realizing that even in the midst of a civilizational abyss, he had to secure the external order of the Pacific coast. He understood that the big cycle of American history was heading west, and he used the industrial alpha of the North to lay the steel foundation of a global superpower. By 1864, the mechanical reality of the war had shifted. The North was producing more rifled muskets and ironclad ships than the rest of the world combined, while the Southern system was suffering a total structural collapse due to the Union's hard-coded blockade. Lincoln acted as the chief engineer of this war machine, using the logic of mass production to ensure that the Union human machine was always better fed, better armed, and more mobile than the enemy. He proved that a leader who masters technical innovation and radical truth can reshape the biological heart of a nation even during its most violent systemic failure. The ultimate synthesis of this period was the realization that the Union was not just a political idea but an industrial powerhouse that could not be broken by agrarian rebellion. Lincoln had successfully moved the strategy of the central position from the map to the assembly line, ensuring that the momentum of the North was irreversible. Focus on the rhythmic clicking of the telegraph keys, embrace the atmospheric power of the steam locomotive, and remember that the most durable part of any national machine is the infrastructure that connects its people. This was the secret of the high-tech Lincoln, and the reason the story of us is a story of unstoppable innovation. This third part of the story of us focuses on the final synthesis of the war, how the Union industrial machine reached its total concentration of force, and how Lincoln used the logic of the railroad and the telegraph to reconstruct the internal order of a shattered nation. Following your instructions, the text is a continuous high-density flow designed for long-form TTS narration without any breaks or headers. 5-step process. For ending the conflict required a war of attrition, backed by the unstoppable momentum of the Northern production machine, so he elevated Ulysses S. Grant to the position of General-in-Chief to act as the surgical driver of this new war logic. His goal was the simultaneous deconstruction of every Southern army. His problem was the grit of the entrenched Confederate internal order. His diagnosis was that the ship of state could only be mended by a total concentration of force that destroyed the South's logistic engine. His design was the coordination of Grant's hammer in Virginia and Sherman's mechanical scythe in Georgia, and his execution was a display of aggressive persistence that saw the Union war machine operating as a single, unified organism connected by thousands of miles of telegraphic data flow. This was the turning point where the story of us transitioned from a conflict of ideals to a conflict of mass production. Lincoln utilized the mechanical advantage of the U.S. military railroads, a state-run powerhouse that could move an entire Army Corps across 3 states in less than a week, proving that logistic velocity was the new alpha of the 19th century. As the external order of the Confederacy collapsed under the weight of the hard-coded blockade and the loss of its rail hubs, Lincoln began to prototype the internal order of the peace, pushing for the 13th Amendment to ensure the biological engine of slavery was permanently disconnected from the American system. He understood that the big cycle of the war was ending, and he used his second inaugural address as a psychological reset for the nation, moving from the logic of revenge to the logic of malice toward none. The ultimate synthesis was achieved in April 1865 when the Union machine finally occupied Richmond, proving that a centralized industrial democracy was the highest form of the national archetype. Lincoln had moved the United States from a loose collection of agricultural parts to a synchronized industrial superpower that was now ready to dominate the global stage. Even as he fell to the mechanical violence of an assassin, His design and plan for a continental empire was already irreversible, fueled by the steel and steam he had championed. Focus on the overwhelming kinetic power of the Union supply lines, embrace the atmospheric solemnity of the final victory at Appomattox, and remember that the most powerful part of any national machine is the moral anchor that holds it together after the fire has died down. This was the final chapter of the Lincoln era, and the reason the story of us is a story of a nation reborn through the industrial forge.